campus, namely words, there are too many damn Jews on campus. And in his sheer brilliance, wisdom, and intellect, decides the best way to deal with the explosion of Jewish students on campus is to what? Is just create a quota. Have a cap on how many Jews who are admitted onto the university, have a legalized metric of discrimination against Jewish students. As a fun fact, there were more Jews at Harvard University as a percentage under the quota system than there are today. At its peak, Harvard was 25% Jewish. Today, it is 4%. And it's not because Jews got dumber over time. It's because there has been a deliberate and systemic campaign to crack down on the amount of Jews at Harvard University. The problem with the quota system is its shocking relevance to the 21st century, to today. So there's a woman, you may have heard of her, by the name of Claudine Gay. And it's funny, my doctors tell me now that I have high blood pressure, and I say, 2 words, Claudine Gay, this lady. So she is the worst. So a couple of years ago, she decides, I'm not going to comment on the politics, I'm not saying this was right or wrong, I'm just saying this is what they decided. They decided that words can be dangerous, words can be derogatory, words can be offensive. So Harvard University, because they always have to be better and different than everybody else, they don't use the term RA, a resident advisor, to describe a graduate student who lives in the undergraduate dorms in charge of the students' daily lives. They use the term master of the house, which, yeah, I didn't pick it. Okay, would not have been my first choice. And Claudine Gay decides a couple of years ago that we want to build a more equitable, more inclusive, more diverse campus. And if African-American students want to feel more welcomed, we're going to do away with the term master of the house, which again, I don't really have a problem with. And so now it's no longer called a master of the house, it's called a dean or a tutor of the house. The problem is, if you remember our friend Abbott Lowell from Harvard, the plurality of undergraduate Jewish students right now at Harvard University live in a dorm called Lowell House. They live in the building named after the dude who didn't want them on campus to begin with. So if you want to play the game that all minority students need to have a safe space and feel included and language can really be offensive, then fine, play the game. The problem is, as we'll talk about in the next few minutes, Harvard has consistently, routinely, and historically deployed a double standard as it pertains to how they treat all minority students and how they treat Jewish students. And you don't even have to take my word for it. So there's an American NGO called the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expressions, FIRE. And FIRE, about 2 years ago, they ranked 248 American universities as to how well they defended free speech, their commitment to the First Amendment, their ability to discern controversial ideas in academic discourse. Out of 248 American universities, Harvard was literally ranked 248. They were ranked dead last when it came to their protections and commitments to free speech. This is a university, and again, I'm not saying right or wrong, I'm not going to take a side, I'm just saying this is what they do. This is a university that routinely rescinds invitations to guest speakers who are deemed transphobic, who are deemed misogynistic, who are deemed controversial. This is a university that 5 years ago expelled 12 students who posted sexist memes in a private WhatsApp group. So the problem is, when we went to the Harvard administrator, this is my first month being a student at Harvard, this is years before October 7th, because the Palestine Solidarity Committee at Harvard, which is the largest compilation of intellectually challenged morons I've met in my life, they decide that they're going to invite Muhammad El-Kurd to come speak to campus. For those of you who don't know who Muhammad El-Kurd is, good job, you're not missing out, an idiot. This is a guy who has professed, seriously and openly, that Jews eat the organs of Palestinians, that the Israeli occupying forces have internalized the ways of Nazi Germany. And for those of you who have the misfortune of being on Twitter, number one, you should follow me. Jake Tapper follows me. That's pretty cool. My mom does not follow me. That's a little weird, a little awkward family dinners. Yeah, follow me. This is a guy who lamented on Twitter about a month ago how sad it is that Palestinians can no longer hijack planes anymore. So he also just posted like a week ago saying, and I quote, all Zionists must perish. So the Harvard Palestine Solidarity Committee, again, with their high IQ and their sheer brilliance, decided this is the dude that they want to come speak on Harvard's campus for the third time. So we went to the Harvard admin, including the president, and we said, look, rightly or wrongly, you guys have a track record of disciplining speech you don't like. Why don't you simply apply that logic to Jewish students? I mean, Muhammad El-Kurd, I'm not kidding, is a guy who appears on the Anti-Defamation League's top 10 anti-Semites. Do you know how impressive that is? I mean, there's like so much competition to get on that list. And we said, why don't you apply that logic to Jewish students? And for the first time, Harvard did something remarkable. They looked at us, shrugged their shoulders, and said, well, he has a First Amendment right. What do you want us to do about it? I mean, that is a shocking double standard. That's blatantly anti-Semitic. And as we will prove in court, we're suing them. I'll get to that in a second. As we will prove in court, I mean, that is discriminatory. So The reality is there was pervasive and systemic anti-Semitism way before October 7th. And in fact, if you Google my name, which I don't encourage you to do, but if you do, you'll see one of the criticisms I get, which I get a lot of criticism. Most of it's really silly. Some of it's like legit. One of the silliest criticisms is people call me this conservative political partisan hack, which, could not be further from the truth, because when I went to Harvard, I deliberately took classes that challenged my preconceived notions, that motivated me to go beyond my intellectual comfortable limits, because that ultimately is what an institution of higher learning should be about. It should be about engaging in ideas you don't like, and all for the pursuit of veritas, for the pursuit of truth. So I took a class my first semester called Religion, Nationalism, and Settler Colonialism, the Case of Israel-Palestine. Yeah, I know, right? That was my reaction too. Thank you. Again, it's been a rough year. I lost a lot of friends. I get death threats. If you want to help Jewish students, just laugh at my jokes, okay? It'll really good. That was good practice. I know it's like a lot to ask. They're not very funny, but it makes me feel good. So in this class, I'm not exaggerating one iota of this class. We literally read texts from convicted Palestinian terrorists. That's not hyperbole. It's not conjecture. It's not speculation. We read a text from a dude who was sitting in prison right now for trying to blow up a movie theater in West Jerusalem in the 1980s. One of the week's titles of the course was called The Holocaust and the Ongoing Nakba, which tried to do two things. One, it tried to argue as fact that the experience of Jews under Nazi Germany is analogous to the treatment of Palestinians under the Israeli occupying forces. And then it also tried to argue, again as fact, that historically Jews have been powerless. And now with the advent of the state of Israel, the only way we know how to exert and exhibit that power is, in fact, by internalizing the ways of Nazi Germany, which is how you students can now understand why the IOF, the Israeli occupying forces, is so Gestapo-esque in their tactics. I'm a little embarrassed to admit this, but I am suing Harvard, so I like to think I'm, repenting. But towards the end of the semester, it became readily apparent what I needed to do well academically, and I wrote my final paper for the course on Yeshayahu Leibowitz, who's a fascinating figure in Jewish history, and with an epilogue at the end. And in the epilogue, I denounced the religious Zionist values I had grown up in, and to this day, it is the only paper at Harvard University I ever got an A+ in. And it's like a very bad paper. I use like ChatGPT for half of it, so I should not have don't repeat that, but it was not worthy of an A+. There was another, so that course is taught by 3 professors. One of them was the former spokesman for the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO, which is a story for another time. 2 of those professors, yeah, I know. 2 of those professors teach another course. This course is called Narratives in Displacement, the Case of Israel-Palestine. This course is very popular because in addition to being a regular course about Israel-Palestine, they actually take you to what they call Israel-Palestine. I say it's what they call Israel-Palestine because the Palestine they take you to is like the Motel 6 in Tel Aviv, and the students are too dumb to realize they're not in Ramallah. So it's true. I'd also want to add, just as a tangent, just for a moment, I'm banned from China for 3 years. I have an arrest record in Poland. That's probably why I'm still single. And if you were to spend the last 2 years at Harvard in a vacuum, you would literally not know that China was a country. Because the only country that is singularly discussed and obsessed over is what? Israel-Palestine. And the Religion and Public Life Department, where these classes are being taught and where I study, they've had in the last year and a half more than 50 events on Israel-Palestine, which is more than every other country combined. They are obsessed. I digress. So they take it Israel-Palestine. It's very competitive. It's a very hot topic. All the students want to go. And you have to apply. So I applied because, again, I'm not this conservative political partisan hack. I like to challenge myself and hear ideas I don't agree with. And in this class, when I interviewed, the professors told me the following. These are 2 professors from the original course. They knew who I was. They said, Shabbos, we've never had someone like you apply before. And I didn't know if that meant because I wear a kippah, because I don't believe in nuking Israel off the map. I wasn't sure what they meant by that. I said, yes, it's so important. I come on this class, I go on this program because in my insular Orthodox community, we're not allowed to discuss Israel-Palestine, which of course is not true, but that's what my professors wanted to hear. And they said, well, we're very concerned. I said, why are you concerned? They said, well, if we take you to Israel-Palestine, which again, Motel 6 in Tel Aviv, and you see, this is way before October 7th, you see the settler colonialism, you see the genocide, you see the illegal displacement of Palestinians, you see the reality on the ground. Through the process of unlearning, which is a term so dumb, only a Harvard professor can come up with it, you will be so psychologically traumatized because you will have realized for the last 25 years, you have been fed a diet of lies, and you will not be able to reassociate yourself back with your Jewish day school, back with your Jewish community, and back with your Jewish synagogue. And we, as your professors, don't want to be liable for that psychological trauma. And they rejected me from the program. One of those professors teaches another course. That course is called Religion and Peace, the case of... Who's paying attention? Okay, at least someone's paying attention. The case of Israel-Palestine. This professor gets up, and I'm not making this up. Nitzan Flitman is an Israeli student at Harvard Law School. She corroborates everything I'm about to tell you. She's wrote an article about this in Haaretz. It's in Hebrew if you read Hebrew. Professor gets up. She says, the Israeli narrative is the dominant narrative in politics, media, in society, which, I know in LA, you guys are big in marijuana. I don't know what she was smoking, but that is just not true. And she says, therefore, in order to understand both sides of the story, in this class, which again is called Religion and Peace, the case of Israel-Palestine, we will not discuss, we will not learn, we will not study, we will not even read any texts if they were written by Israelis. So people often ask me post-October 7th, my reaction to anti-Semitism, and I always say one response, which is I'm shocked, but I'm not surprised, because this is an inevitable outcome of years and years of political indoctrination. In fact, I wrote an article for Aish.com, which is a Jewish publication. If you ever need to steal a Dvar Torah, go to Aish.com. And if that doesn't work, go to Chabad.org. Actually, go to Chabad.org first, and then, So I wrote an article for them called Antisemitism at Harvard, and I wrote it in October of 2021. And no one read it, trust me. It didn't go anywhere, but it was bad. It was bad way before October 7th. So just in the interest of time, I'll tell you something funny, by the way. Again, this is me having attention deficit disorder. I was I gave a talk, I don't know, a month or two ago in Boca, and 30, 40 minutes in, I look at my timer and I say, wow, I'm doing really well on time. And then I realized I never actually started the timer. So I was ready to keep going, and the rabbi was like, get the hell off the stage. It was 4 hours. So I am doing well on time. But nevertheless, I will just jump ahead to October 7th, and then we'll go to October 7th. I was at Harvard Chabad on October 7th, which was the Jewish joyous holiday of Simchas Torah. We were celebrating, we were dancing, we were drinking. I speak to a lot of high schoolers, so I always have to say we were drinking lots of water. And all of a sudden, there were rumors. There was speculation. There was a bombing, there was a stabbing, there was a shooting. Many of you, I assume, are either Israeli or you lived in Israel, you know people in Israel. I lived in Israel for 3 years. And the reality is having a Jewish state in the 21st century, unfortunately, means that there is terrorism. I think I just said this. I lived in the old city of Jerusalem for 3 years. In yeshiva, my rabbi was stabbed to death outside of Jaffa Gate. A 12-year-old boy was stabbed 2 doors down from where I lived. No, it's not good. We don't like it. But unfortunately, it is a reality of having a modern Jewish state of Israel in the 21st century. So when we heard these rumors, it was bad. We didn't like it, but there was a limit to what we could actually do. The problem was, as the night went on, the rumors persisted and the rumors were strengthened. And it became readily apparent that what we young Jews were experiencing was something we had never experienced before. And that is Israel as an existential issue. Israel, where its legitimacy, its existence, its survival is very much in question. And the next 5 minutes or so are going to be a little, sad and depressing. So I like to emotionally break it up, because I do this talk a lot. I like to emotionally break it up by telling you a really funny story that happened in Miami last month. So I was giving this talk in Miami last month, and because it was Miami, the average age of the audience was deceased. And when I said that in Boca, they booed me, but I guess in LA I could say that joke. That's okay. Remind me that I said that. That's a funny one. And as I get as part of the story, I said, I never experienced Israel as an existential issue. I said, I was 5 years old. I probably wasn't in diapers, but I was 5 years old during the second. Yeah, I definitely was not in diapers by 5. But I was 5 years old during the second Intifada, and I don't really remember it. I was not alive during the first Lebanon War, the second Lebanon War, the first Intifada, Suez Canal crisis, Yom Kippur's 6-Day War. And I said, unlike many of you in the audience, I don't remember the 1948 War of Independence. And they got so offended, how dare you? We don't remember. But they literally all remembered it, so I don't know what they were complaining. So anyways, that's just a funny way to emotionally break this up, because unfortunately, the next 5 minutes are a little sad, but there is hope at the end, so bear with me. I was on a panel with with what's her name? Alveda King, Martin Luther King Jr.'s niece, about, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks ago in DC. And she reminded me of a great quote from her uncle, which is, "We won't remember the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." And at Harvard University, we would have been lucky to have simply had the silence of our friends. I'm a religious Jew. I don't use my phone or any electronics on the Sabbath or on Jewish holidays. For the first time in my life, my rabbi told me to do this. I went to my dorm, I took out my phone, I started contacting my loved ones in Israel. I have 4 siblings, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, nephews. And it took me a couple hours, but thank God they were okay. But that was not true of all Harvard Jewish students. And it certainly wasn't true of all Jewish students on college campuses. Many, many, many lost siblings, lost relatives, lost friends and family. But the problem is, and this is where I get a little pushback, to me, the story of October 7th is not what Hamas did. I mean, Hamas should be wiped off from the face of the earth. They are below scum. But we know what Hamas is capable of doing because they literally write in their charter that their sole goal is the destruction of the Jewish state, from the river to the sea. The former head of Nasrallah, the former head of Hezbollah, Nasrallah, may his neshama have an aliyah. He's not with us anymore. He said it would actually be more convenient for all the Jews to live in Israel because then we wouldn't have to go across the world and kill them. It's just one location. It's really convenient. So they're terrorists. We know what they're capable of doing. What we were not expecting, what we were not anticipating was the most progressive, the most elite, the most educated, the most sensitive, those who introduce themselves with their preferred gender pronouns, those who take knees for Black Lives Matter, those who marched at the Supreme Court against the reversal of Roe v. Wade, people who are pretty sensitive to these cultural issues, who saw the images on live TV on the night of October 7th at Harvard of Jewish women bleeding from their private areas, of Jewish babies crying as they're being hoarded onto motorcycles, being deported by strangers into Gaza, saw the images of mangled, burnt bodies in cars, and 34 student groups at Harvard University representing more than 1,000 students see these images, and their immediate reaction is to jump out of bed, some are still in their pajamas, to draft what they called an emergency statement. Blame Jews for the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. That's not hyperbole, it's not exaggeration, it is fact. The opening of the statement literally says, "We hold the Israeli apartheid regime entirely responsible for all unfolding violence in the Middle East." You know how many times they mentioned or condemned Hamas? 0. In fact, PBS Frontline did a great documentary called The Crisis on Campus. You should all watch it. It's free on YouTube. And they interview me, and I give them my whole shtick. And I'm not saying that's why the interview was so great, but we helped. And they interview 3 of the leading anti-Israel activists at Harvard, and they ask them, given the blowback, given the controversy to this statement, this is like in April, do you regret not mentioning or even condemning Hamas? And these 3 students, who, if you thought the Palestine Solidarity Committee were intellectually challenged, well, these 3 girls, they're wearing their keffiyehs, and they look at each other and they do this. No, we didn't think it was relevant. We didn't think it was relevant. These are Harvard law students. And I hope you can now appreciate what I tell to Democrats and Republicans, what I tell to senators and congressmen, what I tell to presidential candidates, what I say on the national media. This is not merely an issue of anti-Semitism and of Israel. This is an issue that affects the very core of our Western civilization, an issue that strikes at the heart of our American values and our liberal democracy. Because Harvard purports to train the next generation of American leaders, and by and large, they're kind of right. Statistically speaking, it's not an exaggeration to state I probably sat in a room with a future congressman, senator, or president. And if these classmates of mine are America's future leaders, we are at a serious crossroads in our country. We are at a dangerous, dangerous point. Because if you can see on live TV the murder of 45 American citizens, the abduction of dozens of more American citizens, including 7 who are still being held hostage by Hamas in Gaza, and your immediate reaction is to side with the terrorists who did it, that is a really, really bad problem. Because yes, they say death to Israel, but we all know what the next sentence is, which is death to America. Yes, they vandalized all our Israeli flags, but they also vandalized all of our American flags. I mean, the Columbia University Apartheid Divestment Coalition, they have literally stated that their sole goal is, quote, the eradication of Western civilization. I remember when Russia invaded Ukraine, I went to Ukraine. It's a fun story for another time. And I met an Irish volunteer. He was a volunteer for the Ukrainian Foreign Legion. And he told me, we're so lucky the Russians are our enemies. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, the Russians are just so shockingly bad at waging war. They are so mind-numbingly incompetent. They should have taken Kiev, within the first hour. And, 5 years later, they still haven't taken Kiev. He said, we're so lucky they are our enemies because they're so bad at this. And in some ways, I sort of feel the same when it comes to our ideological adversaries. The best case for Israel, the best case for American values, the best case for the Jewish state is look at what our ideological adversaries say and do. They cannot help themselves but burn American flags when they see them. They cannot help themselves but champion terrorist groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. They are our best advocates. In fact, I always joke that Claudine Gay became the best advocate for Jewish students. Why? Because when she was invited to appear at that congressional hearing, it was her, Liz McGill of Penn, and Sally Kornblum of MIT. I'll tell you guys something behind the scenes. If you watch that congressional hearing, the whole hearing is a disaster from start to finish. First of all, it has 1.5 billion views. It's the most watched congressional testimony in history. Number two, Claudine Gay, the president of Harvard, was asked at one point, can you guarantee the safety of incoming Jewish students? And she gave a 5-minute disquisition on how she abhors racism. Like, cool, I guess. And the entire testimony is a disaster. The most infamous part is the context-dependent question. So I'll tell you something funny. We helped Congress with those questions, and Elise Stefanik, I wouldn't say she's a friend of mine, but we're close. I'll actually be doing a dinner with her next week in DC. And when she says, does the call for genocide against Jewish students violate Harvard's code of conduct? That was not meant to be a trick question. That was not meant to be a gotcha moment. The gotcha moment was meant to be the follow-up question. She was just expecting all of them to say, yes, it's so terrible. And then the follow-up was going to be, okay, now that you've all said it's so terrible, how come you've allowed it on your campus? That was meant to be like the kicker. But these three presidents were so remarkably morally bankrupt and incompetent that they said, oh, it depends on the context. And if you rewatch the clip, like Stefanik does like a wait, what? And she literally says, and I quote, this is a softball question. I will give you a second chance to respond. She was trying to help them out. And then the president was like, no, we promise. It really does depend on the context. And he was like, what? No one was expecting that answer. And I remember watching that. The entirety of the Harvard Jewish community did not go to class that day. I remember watching that and banging on the desk and saying aha, you see, I told you. Because for months and months and months, we had been told, no, it's just anti-Zionism. No, this is protected free speech. No, you're exaggerating. But now you have the president of the university under oath on live TV in front of Congress saying you actually could call for the genocide of Jews depending on the right context. And from that moment on, it became undeniable that anti-Semitism was a real, genuine problem at Harvard University. I digress. I talked about that statement. The next day, the Religion and Public Life Department, which those three classes that I mentioned, that's the Religion and Public Life Department, that's where I study. They released their own statement. And the statement begins, the great Palestinian poet once said, which, word of advice, that is a very weird way of starting a statement. And they say, the great Palestinian poet once said, if you want to understand both sides of a story, you have to go to the root of the issue. Which a great Palestinian poet didn't say that. Literally everyone says that because of common sense. They give credit to Palestinians for doing anything that everyone else already did. It's unbelievable. And they say, if you start the story on October 7th, but you don't start the story with the Nakba, with the illegal displacement of Palestinians, with settler colonial violence, you'll only get one side of the story. You know how many times those professors condemned or mentioned Hamas? 0. So where do these brain-dead students get their brain-dead ideas from? They're brain-dead professors. We'll talk about during the Q&A. I'm sure someone will ask about Qatar and Russia and China and foreign funding. And we should talk about it. It's an important issue. But at the end of the day, where's the indoctrination? Yeah, there's foreign funding, but it's the professors. Take it from the dude who knows those professors, who was in those classrooms, who learned those texts. It is directly from the classroom. In fact, one of those professors that I mentioned, she called me into her office after October 7th and threatened to rescind her letter of recommendation because she didn't like that I was advocating for Israel publicly, which I don't usually mention, so don't repeat that. I didn't put that on the lawsuit. It is no coincidence, therefore. Oh, sorry, before I even get to that. About 2-3 days later, Harvard had a rally in Harvard Yard. 1,000 students and professors, all of their keffiyehs, all of their Palestinian flags, all of their glory to the martyrs crap. And this is way before Israel even had any response to October 7th. And a particular idiot by the name of Kojo gets out. Kojo just finished a fully sponsored trip to communist Cuba, where in his own words, he is going to implement lessons of the revolution and instill them on American campuses. So that's just a good sense of who Kojo is. Kojo gets up and says, Hamas is not a terrorist organization. We will look upon them in 10, 20 years as freedom fighters. Who are we to condemn their resistance? You know what the reaction is of 1,000 students and professors at Harvard University? Thunderous applause. Not one person thinks to condemn, challenge, or walk out of that statement. It is no coincidence, therefore, no coincidence at all, that a week later there was a physical assault against a Jewish student at Harvard Business School. It's caught on film. Go on my Twitter. You can see the video for yourself. It is no coincidence, therefore, that an Israeli student was told by her professor to leave the classroom because her Israeli nationality made other students uncomfortable. It is no coincidence, therefore, that a Jewish undergraduate student was spat on for wearing a kippah. It is no coincidence, therefore, that a Harvard employee vandalized all of our hostage posters, writing on clear bebots, quote, "His head is still on, where is the evidence?" Writing on Noah Argamani that Jews are best friends with Jeffrey Epstein, who then challenged me to debate him in a secluded underpass as to whether Jews orchestrated 9/11 and then threatened me with a machete. I had private armed security outside my house for a week. I had a guy with a gun follow me to Chabad when I went to pray to make sure I was okay. And by the way, to this day, considering the dozens of emails and phone calls I've sent Harvard to ask and inquire about this employee's employment status, they have not once responded to me. It is remarkable that any other minority group, I shouldn't say remarkable, it is inconceivable that any other minority group would be treated with the disdain, the disregard, and the contempt that Harvard has routinely showed for their Jewish student population. And in fact, we just observed the anniversary of Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, where thousands of German Jews were deported to concentration camps, their businesses destroyed, and the synagogues burnt down. My great aunt, may she continue to be alive and well, she's in her 90s, she remembers Kristallnacht very, very well because her father, Rav Yosef Breuer, was arrested by the Nazi Gestapo, and he called out to her, just recite from the book of, what's Tehillim? Psalms. Read from the book of Psalms. And she did. She has like a 9-year-old girl. She spent the night of Kristallnacht as her family synagogue was burnt down in the attic reciting from the book of Psalms. And remarkably, her father was released. They were one of the last to escape Nazi Germany. And she will be the first one to tell you that Kristallnacht, the Holocaust, it did not begin with Auschwitz. It did not begin with burning books. It did not begin with broken windows. It began with the acceptance, the normalization, and the celebration of anti-Semitism. And while there are obvious differences between the experience of German Jewry in the 30s and the American experience in the 21st century, one eerie similarity is that normalization and that celebration of Jew hatred. And in fact, when I'm not suing Harvard, I actually study the Holocaust. That is my academic interest. That's what brought me to Harvard. So pretty apropos, I guess. And you know where the first book burning was? It was at the University of Berlin. It was led by college students. In fact, where did they get all the books from? They got it from the university library. It was young people who led this cause. And it is young people today who are leading the cause on college campuses of Jew hatred. So very, very important to remember that we know how the Holocaust happened. It did not happen with Auschwitz. It happened with words. So we filed the lawsuit in January. We did not want to do it, but it became very obvious that Harvard was both unwilling and unable to do anything to combat the problem. You know what Harvard's response was with our lawsuit? They filed a motion to dismiss with prejudice, meaning they were asking a judge not only to toss out our lawsuit, but to make it so that no other Jewish student would ever be able to hold Harvard accountable for anti-Semitism in the future. When we filed an amended complaint, an update to our lawsuit in May to reflect the increasing acts of anti-Semitism, you know what Harvard did? Again, they did not apologize. They did not come to the negotiating table. They did not acknowledge the culture of anti-Semitism. They filed another motion to dismiss with prejudice, saying, toss out Kestenbaum's lawsuit and make it so that no other student will ever be able to hold us accountable for anti-Semitism. And our judge, he's a progressive guy. He worked for the George McGovern campaign. He was a Bill Clinton appointee. Judge Richard Stearns of the Federal District Court of Massachusetts. He writes a pretty scathing ruling. It's 25 pages about 3 months ago. And he says, quote, "The facts as pled show that Harvard failed its Jewish students." And I'm very, very proud to say that we are the first case in American history pertaining to the civil rights violations of Jewish students on a college campus that's actually going to trial. This has never happened before, and this will set legal precedent for many Jewish students to come. And I always say this lawsuit is not about me, it's not about Harvard, it's about American Jewry and the vitality, strength, and future of American Jewry. People often ask me, is the golden age of American Jewry over? And the answer is very simple, not without a damn fight. And that's what this lawsuit is all about. I really do see that we are fighting something much bigger than the students at Harvard. And when we win, amen, please get in touch with me, and I'd love to come back and sponsor Kiddush, because this is our victory. Okay, I don't know if you're clapping for me or for the herring, but I'll assume it's me. It's sushi. Well, hang on, I'm sponsoring. Let's tone it down. Because this is seriously, I really do believe that this is not just about me; it's about the Jewish American Jewish community. Okay, I want to wrap up because I'm out of time by saying 2 quick things. I'd like to think the last 13 months I have been relatively calm, cool, and collected. I also like to think I'm funny, but jury's still out on that one, apparently, evidently. And there's one thing, though, that I will not be able to forgive, I will not be able to forget, and that is the encampments. Forget about the fact that during the encampments, they called for an intifada at all hours of the day. Forget about the fact that they drew our interim Jewish president with horns and a tail, calling him a devil. Forget about all of that. For 3 weeks at Harvard University, every time I, a visibly Jewish person, and other visibly Jewish students and faculty members, every time we cut through Harvard Yard, every time we walked on our own campus, every time we went to class, fellow students, encampment leaders, they would don bright yellow safety vests, they would call themselves safety marshals, and they would take out their phone and they would start following and recording us. And we would ask them to stop, we would ask them what they were doing, and they never once responded. And in fact, some of them had notepads, and they would write down which buildings we were going into. And the president of the university, and the president of the United States, that's a different story, knew that this was happening. We told him about it. It was happening outside of the building where he worked, University Hall. And for 3 weeks, he allowed it to happen. Not only did he do nothing about it, he actually told the encampment leaders, if you agree after 3 weeks to pack up your tents, we will allow you to meet with the Harvard Management Corporation, which oversees Harvard's $50 billion endowment, to talk about divestment from the Zionist entity. If you agree to pack up your tents, we will allow you to meet with senior Harvard faculty to talk about the establishment of a Palestinian Study Center. And if you agree to pack away your tents, we will not discipline or punish any of you. Of the hundreds of professors and students who took part in the encampments, only 12 were suspended. As of 2 months ago, 12 of the 12 had their suspensions revoked. I've never been able to meet with the Harvard president. I've never been able to meet with Harvard DEI. I've never been able to meet with senior faculty members. But if you vandalize property long enough, if you follow Jews long enough, if you yell for an intifada loud enough, you will be given a seat at the table. It is inconceivable and shocking and dangerous that this pernicious manifestation of anti-Semitism was allowed and encouraged for months, really for years. And I'll close by saying one story. I spoke at the Republican convention. I offered to speak at the Democratic convention too, because I'm bipartisan. But okay. I'm still waiting to hear back from the Democratic convention. They'd like to have me speak, but who knows? And the morning of my speech, a limo picks me up from my hotel, which if I end up dating your granddaughter, this is a story I'm going to tell her. It's a very cool flex. And flex means like a brag. Okay, yes. You're young. You know what I mean. Okay. Not that you guys aren't young, but you're not. You're young in spirit, just not young in biological age. The limo picks me up. They take me to the convention arena. We do what's called a walkthrough. A walkthrough is exactly what it sounds like. The stage manager, his name was Eric, he says, Mr. Kestenbaum, this is the podium you're going to use. This is what your hair and makeup is going to look like, which is a little weird coming from the Republicans. This is the, because the transgender stuff. This is the teleprompter you're going to use, which off the record, the speech I gave and what was on the teleprompter were two very different things. I ad-libbed a significant amount of my speech. And we did the walkthrough and I rehearsed and it took like 2 hours. And Eric kept saying, Mr. Kestenbaum, do you have any questions? Do you have any questions? As you can tell by how I'm dressed, I really don't care how I look. I did not care what was on the teleprompter because I knew I wouldn't be using it anyways. I really did not have any questions. And after 2 hours, I finally go back, I open the door to the limo and I turn around and I say, you know, Eric, I actually have one question. Can you promise me when I give this talk later tonight, in front of 30,000 people in the arena, in front of the former president, in front of millions of Americans who are watching, can you promise me that the camera that is televising the speech will be able to see that I'm wearing a kippah? It's the only question I ask. Because, okay, yeah, that you can clap for. Okay, thank you. Because I have two friends, well, more than two friends, although not by much. Definitely not by much. I have two friends at Harvard right now who, in response to October 7th, have taken off their kippah. I have a list in my phone of hundreds of Jewish students from across North America who I've met who have told me, in response to October 7th, they've taken off the kippah, they've tucked in their Star of David necklace, they have ceased their involvement with Jewish life on campus. And I thought, irrespective of the words coming out of my mouth, regardless of the substance of my speech, what was most imperative, really the only thing I cared about, was that those two friends and the hundreds that I've made along this journey would be able to see in the 21st century, American Jews can and should and must be wearing their Jewish pride as loudly, as publicly, and as confidently as ever before. That is the only thing I cared about. And in fact, the night of my speech, I was in the speaker's lounge. I was eating like chips with JD Vance, which Tim Walls right, they were like a little weird. And an usher comes to get me. And okay, I'm going to say something a little inappropriate, but it's very funny, so bear with me. When I first said this story, I didn't use the word usher. I said an escort came to get me. And like, as I'm saying it, the audience looks at me horrified. I'm like, is everything okay? And they're like, what do you mean an escort came to you? I'm like, oh, no, that wasn't. That was the other delegate. So now I'm very clear. I say an usher. An usher came and I don't know how else to say it, and escorted me down. Like, I don't know how else, whatever. She escorted me down the corridor. And we were flanked by Secret Service on either side, and we get to a very, very small room backstage. The small room backstage is 4 people. It's me, it's Lee Zeldin, who's a politician in New York, and it's Omer Nutra's parents. Omer Nutra, of course, is the American Jewish civilian still being held hostage by Hamas in Gaza. In fact, he just celebrated his 23rd birthday last week. This is the second birthday that he observed while being a hostage in Gaza. And I go to his parents, Ronan and Orna, and I tell them there's nothing I can say. There's definitely nothing I can do. I just want to add that the courage, the bravery, and the inspiration that you have given me on an individual level is something I will never be able to repay for the rest of my life. And with that, I left the room. I cried a little. Remember, the Republicans had me in makeup, so the mascara was all like that. Right, thank you. Not a lot of people get that. We women, we get that, right? The mascara, yeah. And I gave my speech. And the last 13 months, I've been very blessed and fortunate and privileged to have met some pretty important people, to have given some big speeches, to have gone to some pretty cool places. But I can promise you that none of them hold a candle to the 2-minute conversation I had with Omer Neutra's parents. None of them compare. In fact, after October 7th, actually, I bought a one-way ticket to Israel. Full disclosure, I say it's one way, but that's really because American Airlines canceled the return ticket because there was a war. But don't tell your granddaughter I said that part. That will not be discussed at the date. And I spent 3 weeks delivering supplies to army bases. I spent 3 weeks digging graves for soldiers who were killed in Gaza. I spent 3 weeks playing guitar and singing songs for injured civilians in hospitals. And it's funny, they said, please, we've suffered enough, because I don't have a very good voice. And I did that. It's true. I did that because, yes, it's true I want to get out of Harvard, but I've never in my life felt more attached to the land of Israel, more connected to the people of Israel, and more confident and proud of my Jewish values and my Jewish identity. And while it is true, I have that list of people who ceased their involvement with Jewish life. For every one, I can show you 50 more who bought a kippah or bought a bigger kippah after October 7th, who have said, I'm not observant, but I'm going to adopt a hostage and recite from the book of Psalms every night, or I'm going to light Shabbat candles. In fact, at Harvard Chabad, we have record numbers. We have to clear out the attic because there were just so many people. And that is the story. And I'm here to tell you that young American Jews have woken up after October 7th, and we're simply not going back to sleep. In fact, when I was taking this one-way trip, I was at Boston Logan Airport, which is a pretty small airport, and there were dozens of young Jewish students, presumably, with Israeli flags, American flags, blasting Hebrew music, throwing candy. And this young girl comes up to me. I don't know her name. I had never seen her before, haven't seen her since. She cannot have been older than like 15 at most. And she hands me an envelope and says, please, take this. And I realize what's inside the envelope. It's dozens and dozens of $100 bills. I can't take this. And I kid you not, this like 15-year-old girl, she hugs me and she starts bawling, and with tears in her eyes, and her face is red, she says, please, please take this for me. Give it to the first person you see in Israel. The 15-year-old girl was saying this. And I was giving a talk a few weeks ago, and in the middle of a talk, someone raises their hand and says, I need to add something. And I get death threats every day from the far left and the far right. See, I'm very bipartisan. Both sides want to kill me. It's true. And I get protested, I get heckled. At one time, rocks were thrown through the window, so no, not great. So normally when a person raises their hand and says, I just want to add something, it's never a good sign. But this person, she gets up, and I realize she's quite elderly. She has a walker. She says, my name is Regina. I'm 102 years old. I am a survivor of Majdanek. I am a survivor of Bergen-Belsen, and I'm a survivor and fought in the Warsaw Ghetto uprisings. And she said, now you know why I say the average age of Miami is deceased. And she says, I want to tell you all, we will get through this because we've gotten through it before. And then she sits back down. And I'm here to tell you that we will get through this because we've gotten through it before. We, young American Jews, are standing on the shoulders of giants. We are standing on the shoulders of people like Regina, of that 15-year-old girl, of the Ronen and Omer and Orna Neutras. And I'm not the most religious dude in the world, but I'm telling you, I've never felt more privileged and more inspired to be part of the greatest story ever told. That is the story of the Jewish people. It's a tragic story. It's a sad story. It's also a beautiful story. It's a miraculous story. And I always tell young people, the next chapter in that story will be about us. And do not allow our ideological adversaries to write that chapter for us. Take back our own narrative. And that's exactly what so many young Jews have done. They have stood up and said, I am Jewish. I want to be counted as part of this story, as part of this people. And as you can probably tell, I'm like 5 feet. The IDF does not want me, all right? Trust me, not until I peel the potatoes. I'll give half a Golani salmonella. And while it is true, and while it is true that I cannot fight in Gaza, what is true is I can fight in the battleground of ideas. I can fight in the court of law. I can fight in the court of public opinion. I can fight in the halls of power, I can fight in the halls of Congress. I can fight in media, I can fight in social media, I can fight in the classroom, I can fight on the campuses. And that is a fight that each and every one of you, regardless of your personal capacities, regardless of your talents, each and every one of you must join me, must join those courageous Jewish students across college campuses who are in that fight every day, each day and every day. Join us in that fight. And if you do that, you will be a living testament to the ideal, to the promise that Am Yisrael Chai, that not only do the people of Israel live, but the people of Israel will always live. Do that, join us in that story. And I'll close by saying this. My brother just had a child, his second child, and the child's first 2 days was spent in a bomb shelter because he was born the day Iran launched the 200 ballistic missiles. And the bris, the circumcision of the child, my nephew, was on October 7th, 2024. And the next day, the child's father, my brother, he put on his uniform and he reported to reserve duty in Lebanon. And I text my brother, his child's father, and I say, like, what is going through your mind? What are you thinking? And he says, what an immense privilege. For the first time in 3,000 years, I have a uniform to put on, I have a country to defend, and I have a people, values, and a land that is worth protecting. And that is a fight that is a fight that each and every one of us can, should, must wage ourselves. And again, if you do that, you will be counted, you will be heard, you will be a living testament that yes, Yisroel. Hi. Thank you very much. No. All right. Thank you, Dan. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions. I'll just preface it by saying two things. It'll probably take me 19 hours to get back, so I do want to have a reasonable bedtime. The second thing is, I'll say something funny. When I speak to non-Jewish groups, the way they ask questions is remarkable. You know how they ask a question? They just ask it. It's like 10 words or less. And when I speak to Jewish groups, here's how it starts. First, they ask me if I'm single, which we already clarified. Yes. Then they'll ask me if I'm related to the Kestenbaums in Pasadena, which I don't think I am, so I don't know. Then they'll tell me about how when they were at Columbia University in 1964, they had a professor. And if there's time, they'll get to the question. Just in the interest of time, just ask the question so we can get to everybody. Yes?
Yeah, I have a question. The question is regarding not what the Jewish students can do, but the problem is that Israel today is more dependent on America than what it was after 67 or ever.
Yeah.
And we have a problem that at every university, not just Harvard, at Stanford, at Berkeley, at Columbia, etc., the students are getting these progressive ideas or progressive instructors, and they are going to be the tomorrow's leaders. So as we are so dependent in America on America, what will happen a few years from now when these people will be leading the country?
Sure. So the question is, what will happen to the American-Israel relationship, especially given the fact that Israel is so dependent on American support and assistance, if the future leaders are so anti-Israel, which is why I implore all of you to fight back and join me so that is not the case. That's number one. Number two, college campuses exist in a vacuum. So for example, there was a Harvard-Harris poll conducted shortly before the election, and it asked young Americans aged 18 to 34, what are your top 15 concerns? And the Israel-Gaza war was ranked 15th. Young people don't actually care about the issue that much. We wouldn't know that because we're Jewish and we very much care about the issue. And on college campuses, that is all they care about. But the reality is, once young people actually leave college campuses, it's unclear whether they retain some of this anti-Israel narrative and rhetoric. The problem is, as you just addressed, well, some of them can and some of them will be future leaders. So we have to have a response. We have to have a counter narrative to their argument, which is why I'm unbelievably privileged that there is a coalition of young American Jews, and not just Jews, but young Americans who believe in Western civilization, who believe in the only democracy in the Middle East, and who believe in Jewish values and are ready to fight back. So we're not going to go quietly into the night. We are going to make sure that future leaders recognize the importance of Israel and recognize the promise of the United States. And without getting too into the politics, but I think this last election really signified, I don't just mean the presidency, but I mean up and down ballots, people who were vehemently anti-Israel, by and large, lost their elections. Running as an anti-Israel candidate is not good politics. It just isn't. I mean, just look at Congress and look at the Senate. Most people who took a strong stance against Israel did not win their re-election. Yeah, there's a question in the back. Sure. The question was, when I went to Harvard, was I aware of the anti-Semitism? I'm the only Orthodox Jew in my program, the only one who kept Shabbat, who kept kosher, and I only knew of 3 other Jews of a similar background who did that, and all of them told me not to go, not just because of anti-Semitism, but the scholarship, the academic rigor as it pertains to the study of religion is actually pretty weak at Harvard. Most of the people there in my program haven't even read the Bible. It's just a lot of social activism and political theater. But I was a naive young idealist, and I said, I can change it, and how bad can it really be? So I knew that I knew that it would be an uphill battle, but I was not prepared for what would happen after October 7th. I studied religion, the religion department. Yeah.
Ali.
First of all, you will make the difference. You will make the difference. Sure. The question I have is about the commission that was created to fight anti-Semitism. Rabbi David Wolpe was one of the group.
Yeah.
Did that commission
Nope.
produce anything?
Yeah, so the question was, well, let me give you some background. Was it right after? I think it was right after her congressional testimony, but I could be wrong on the timeline, so don't quote me. But at some point, Claudine Gay promises she's going to establish what she called an anti-Semitism advisory group. And the anti-Semitism advisory group was as useless as it sounds. So David Wolpe is the most respected member. He was my professor. He's a rabbi here in LA, so you guys know. Tell him I say hi. No, please, he's a great guy. He resigned. It was before, because he resigned after the congressional testimony. So she put the committee before. He resigns very, very quickly. Dara Horn, who, if you know the book People Love Dead Jews, she's a brilliant author. She was also part of the advisory group. She got her BA at Harvard, and she just gave congressional testimony to the House Education Committee, detailing how we were never given a mandate. Claudine Gay and senior Harvard administrators never met with us. It was unclear if we had any power. And the entire purpose of the advisory group was for Harvard to say, as they're saying right now in court against us, we abhor anti-Semitism. We take it so seriously because we established an advisory group. So after Claudine Gay was fired, aka resigned, not because of anti-Semitism, because she plagiarized, the advisory group was disbanded. So me, being the annoying Jew I am, I email the Harvard spokesman, Jason Newton, because Jason Newton said, the advisory group has completed their work, and we will take what they say into consideration. So I emailed Jason Newton. I said, okay, what were their findings? Like, what did they find? And he said, oh, we can't tell you. I said, oh, like, why not? He's like, oh, well, the findings are private. I'm like, the findings are private because there were no findings. The advisory group didn't do anything. Alan Garber is the interim president. And he decides, okay, here's how we're going to tackle anti-Semitism. We're going to establish an anti-Semitism task force, which is very different than the advisory group, because this is now a task force. It was equally useless. The co-chair of the task force, Professor Rafaela Sadoun of the business school, she resigns a week after being named the task force for literally saying what I just told you. This is useless. This is a way for Harvard to pretend that they're doing anything about it. So they replace her with a different professor named Derek Penslar. Professor Derek Penslar has stated on the record 3 separate times that anti-Semitism at Harvard University is, quote, exaggerated. He also signed a letter 2 years ago during the judicial reform protests in Israel that the Bibi government is trying to instill a system of apartheid and ethnic cleansing against Palestinians. So he's the dude who's in charge of the anti-Semitism task force, which just gives you an idea of how idiotic Harvard is. They released their preliminary reports because they were meant to release their entire findings by June, which of course they didn't. Now it's going to be in December. I can promise you they're not going to release it in December. But they released preliminary findings. In their preliminary findings, which is only 7 pages long, they only offer one concrete policy recommendation, which is, and again, I'm not making this up, go on my Twitter, you can see the original document, which is that pork products in the Harvard cafeteria should be labeled as such. That is their only suggestion, which, by the way, 1, it's just dumb, and 2, it also totally does not understand or appreciate the Jewish community. Because if you keep kosher, we actually don't eat at the Harvard cafeteria. We only eat at the Hillel because that's the only kosher cafeteria. So it's not even a problem for us. I mean, they're just so disconnected from Jewish students. They're so disconnected from reality. And one of the reasons our lawsuit went to trial is because the judge saw through their BS. They kept saying, we take anti-Semitism seriously because look at all these task forces. And the judge said, okay, what do the task force do? Well, we have so many task forces. Like a task force is not a substitute for action. If you haven't done anything, it's irrelevant. So I'm very honored to, I would call him a friend of mine. I have immense respect for him, but he's a mentor of mine. I'm very honored that I got to study under him and see his leadership firsthand. And I'm very appreciative of him calling out Harvard and for resigning from the Harvard Anti-Semitism Task Force and for the other professors who did similarly. Yeah, in the front.
If you can't, answer this question, that's okay. I just wanted to ask where you are currently with the lawsuit, and are there plans to escalate it to the Supreme Court if necessary?
Well, hopefully we won't have to get to the Supreme Court. Hopefully we'll get an easy victory in the Federal District Court of Massachusetts. But we don't have a trial date just yet. I will be deposed by Harvard in like 2 months, I think. So my lawyers always tell me, you guys watch Suits or Law and Order, everything you can and say will be used against. Well, it's also in real life. It's the Miranda League, so I probably should use that reference and not a TV reference. But they always say anything you can and say will be used against you. So they don't like when I speak. They didn't want me to speak at the RNC, but I always tell them we're fighting 2 fights. We're fighting in the court of law, but also the court of public opinion. That's what this is. So deposition is the first step. After that comes discovery. The discovery deadline is May, but that's like the latest. We want to do it as soon as possible. And then we take it from there. We're demanding a trial by jury, so we'll see what happens. Yeah.
Have you seen any evidence? So being funded by like Qatar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in terms of foreign funding, this is not conspiratorial. This is not conjecture. This is not speculation. It is fact that in the last 20 years alone, Qatar, Russia, China, and Saudi Arabia have given the Ivy League universities in the United States more than $20 billion. In fact, Yale University had to report how much money they were receiving from Qatar, and it turns out they were underreporting it annually by $25 million, which is a lot of money to underreport. So there is a bill, I'll get to in a second, there is a bill right now in the Senate called the Deterrent Act. The Deterrent Act would regulate and really crack down on this shady, untraceable foreign funding. The problem is Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, has not brought the Senate has not brought the Deterrent Act to a Senate floor vote. He also has not brought the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act to a floor vote in the Senate. But those 2 pieces of legislation would immediately alleviate the concerns of Jewish students, number one. And number two, it is very, very bad to have adversarial foreign countries. I'm not against foreign funding as a concept. In fact, Qatar gives the most, but the second most is, does anyone want to take a guess? No. The United Kingdom. Which, no one really thinks Queen Elizabeth is trying to, indoctrinate. Well, maybe, but they want the empire back. But foreign funding as a concept isn't necessarily problematic. What is problematic is adversarial countries. So Israel actually gives a lot. Israel gives to MIT. That's actually where Bibi Netanyahu went to college. But we do need to regulate it because there's a significant amount of indoctrination going on. And in fact, Rachel Fish was a Jewish student at Harvard 20 years ago. She uncovered by herself that Harvard Divinity School received a $3 million donation from a Qatari think tank that was platforming Holocaust denier David Irving, that was publishing pamphlets encouraging Arabs to kill American soldiers in Iraq. And it took Harvard 4 years to acknowledge they received the donation and then another year to rescind it. This is 20 years ago. So we can only imagine how much more money has been funneled into it. Yeah.
Eleanor.
News today or yesterday, I found that the U.S. has accepted the fact that Qatar is what Qatar is. They've accepted them as they are, that they have done all, accepted that they've been with Hamas or they've accepted Hamas. In other words, when Blinken goes over there, they're like, oh, buddy, we've been, we know what the U.S. has accepted you just as you are.
Yeah.
So there's no secret.
Right. So the Qatar relationship is a little complicated. There is a U.S. airbase, but President-elect Trump has toyed with the idea of moving the airbase out of Qatar. Since he was elected, supposedly, I've only seen this in like Jewish publications. I haven't actually seen confirmation from the State Department, but supposedly Qatari officials have told Hamas leaders who are living in Doha that they have like a week to leave. So there probably will be a foreign policy change with the new administration. A lot of it is speculative because he won't be inaugurated for 70 more days, but it does seem like there will be a more hardline stance against Qatar.
The whole U.S. government, for 20 years, they've accepted the fact that Qatar acts as it does.
Yeah, correct. I think our foreign policy in the last 20, even more than 20 years, as it pertains to Qatar, as it pertains to Iran, as it pertains to Turkey, has been really, really misguided.
How long were you at Harvard?
I was there for 2.5 years. Don't hold it against me. Nobody's perfect.
Shabbos, can one of the more popular questions that I get is that as a rabbi, they ask me, all these Jewish kids who participate, what is it that these kids are seeing and why are they influenced by anti-Jewish, anti-Semitism, and they participate?
You're saying Jewish kids or
Jewish kids, yeah.
Yeah.
What's your
So-
thoughts on that? I mean, I think I have an idea, but.
Yeah,
what are
so
your-
first of all, because I forgot to answer your other question, I was born on Shabbos. That's how I got the name.
Yeah.
So I
Really?
forgot to answer that. That's why. Oh, if you were born on Tuesday, I've heard it all. Hey, trust me, don't make the jokes. They're not funny. 25 years of living like this. I feel like when I was born, my parents wanted to punish me. So like, just name him Shabbos. Anyways, in terms of your question, so I'll tell you a dirty secret. It's a little unfortunate, but it's true. Harvard and Columbia and Penn and MIT, all the Ivy Leagues, really all college campuses that had encampments. Many of the encampment leaders were Jews, were Jewish people. In fact, again, don't Google my name, but if you do, one of the first things you'll see is this classmate of mine wrote an article saying, I'm a Jew studying at Harvard, Shabbos Kestenbaum doesn't speak for me, which, I don't speak for me. And he talks about, it's a silly article, but what the student fails to mention, weirdly enough, is he was an encampment leader. He followed me on my way to class. He calls for intifada. He wore a keffiyeh on October 9th. Yeah, obviously, I don't speak for you, but he's Jewish. His name is Zev. And I'm telling you this not because I'm observant, so I'm a little biased, but I'm telling you it's true. If you want to combat anti-Semitism, the best thing you can do right now is send your kids to a Jewish day school, is make sure your kids have visited Israel like at least once, is make sure they're affiliated with the Chabad, is make sure they have a connection with a rabbi or a Jewish educator. Because those classmates, the Zev and all the other idiots, they did not receive a Jewish education. They are not affiliated with the Jewish synagogue. They cannot point to Israel on a map. They can't speak Hebrew. They cannot name a single Jewish value other than tikkun olam, which, newsflash, isn't even a mitzvah. I mean, there's 613 options, and they pick one that isn't even part of it. So if you really want to combat anti-Semitism, make sure your kids, your grandkids, your neighbors, whoever, they are educated Jews. They are passionate Jews. They are proud Jews. Because you can't send them on a college campus, tell them, go defend Israel, go defend the Jews, if they don't really know what that means. If they don't really know the experience of Shabbos, I don't mean, okay, wow, now I made a joke. Oh man, I gotta get out of here. But if they don't know the experience of keeping Passover, if they don't know the joy of being Jewish, if they don't know that the state of Israel is a beautiful, multi-ethnic, multiracial, ancestral homeland that we have been praying for 3,000 years, then not only will they not defend it, but they'll be swept up into this crap of, yeah, my Jewish values tell me that we need to free Palestine from the river to the sea. And again, it's not like my opinion. I see this on college campuses. That's literally what happened. There are Jews who protest for Hamas, because they don't know what it means to be Jewish. In fact, a student, one of my classmates, her name, actually she just transitioned, his name is Sheer. So yeah, a lot of problems. Sheer, shouldn't have said that. Sheer wrote an article saying the encampments as religious expression, because Sheer did not go to a Jewish summer camp, did not go to a Jewish day school, was not affiliated with a synagogue. So for Sheer, their only expression of Judaism is going to the encampments and having community and having solidarity. That's really, really sad. And that's a failing of the Jewish community.
Are any of these kids getting paid? People are speaking about people getting paid.
At Harvard, no. Columbia is a different story. I don't like dealing in speculation. I deal with facts and data. It is true. Biden's National Security Council admitted like 4 months ago that Iran is paying protesters, both on college campuses and on the streets, to sow civil unrest. But it's unclear who exactly they're paying. Hezbollah has said the exact same thing. I mean, they said this at not ironically, obviously they said this during an Al Jazeera interview. They said this like 2 weeks ago that they're paying protesters. But again, it's unclear because you can't really trace the money, which again is why the Deterrent Act is so important. So it's unclear who's being paid. It's unclear why, when, how. But yes, there are many people who are being paid to do this. Columbia University is the best example because it's like 2 blocks away from the headquarters of Within Our Lifetime, which is an anti-Israel, I argue, domestic terrorist group. I mean, they do receive funding from the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. They do receive funding from the Chinese Communist Party, and they really infected and infested Columbia University. So many are being paid, but I don't talk about it as much because we can't actually pinpoint who, which makes it more nefarious, more insidious, and more dangerous. Yeah.
Interested in your lawsuit, who are you suing? What are you claiming and what relief are you?
Sure.
Where is it?
We're suing Harvard. The base of our lawsuit rests in a 2019 executive order that President Trump signed. It was Order 13899, which greatly expanded the protections of Jewish students under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. Without that President Trump order, we would not have been able to sue. And we are basically arguing a lot of things, but the most important ones are violations of federal law, Title VI, and the other is a breach of contract. When I give Harvard my tuition, which don't tell Harvard's lawyers, but I'm actually on a full scholarship, so I don't give them tuition. They also pay me to go, so they're probably thinking like, this ungrateful Jew, we give him money and his response is to sue us. But again, I don't think Harvard's lawyers are very incompetent, trust me. The firm is called Wilmer Hale, you can Google them, they're awful. They have lost like all cases they ever sign up on. So of course Harvard hired them. So I don't actually think they know that I'm a scholarship. So when I theoretically give them money, I expect an educational experience and I expect, a modicum of protection in order to get that educational experience. And it's obvious that Harvard has reneged on both of those promises. So we're asking for a couple of things, ranging from practical to more hopeful. Practical being full tuition reimbursements and monetary damages. I've gone through emotional distress, I really have, and Harvard should be on the hook for that. We have in this country a crisis of accountability. Without getting too political, but we've seen laws not being enforced, not just with anti-Semitism, but across this country, laws are not enforced anymore. So I want to make a very clear stand that if you violate the law, there's a penalty to be paid. Harvard owes us money. That's whether it's $1 or $1 million. For the herring, we hope it's a lot, but it has to be something. They have to have a financial penalty. The second thing is an admission of wrongdoing. We need Harvard to admit that they allowed a culture of anti-Semitism to fester. I cannot tell you the amount of times people tell me that what I'm experiencing is just anti-Zionism or it's protected speech. I mean, it's neither of those things. They need to admit they allowed this culture of anti-Semitism. The third thing is the implementation and the enforcement of policy to make sure that no student, Jew or not, will have to go through what we plaintiffs went through. And then we have a bunch of other stuff which are more hopeful. So we're asking a judge to force Harvard to accept the IRA, International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, to have an independent third monitor on Harvard's campus to make sure Harvard's in compliance with Title VI, to have mandatory Title IX training in the same way there already is for fat phobia, for sexism, for ableism. We want there to be the rescinding of the hundreds of millions of dollars they receive annually from anti-democratic, anti-Semitic, anti-Western countries. The firing of faculty who've clearly engaged in anti-Semitism, a zero tolerance policy on anti-Semitism. So we're asking for a lot, but we're very hopeful. So pray for us.
Who's funding this?
We have generous benefactors. If you would like to help, let me know after. Yeah, thank God.
How many are you? How
many plaintiffs?
Yes.
So it's complicated. I'm the only named plaintiff. I tried for months to get other Jewish students to sign on, and none of them wanted to. They were scared of the social isolation, the professional blowback, which is ironic because I've never been offered this many jobs before in my life since I started suing them. It's a weird consequence of this. In the 11th hour, like days before we filed, 5 students, 4 at the law school, 1 at the School of Public Health, agreed to be part of the lawsuit. But it's complicated. They agreed under 3 conditions. 1, they're totally anonymous, so I don't really talk about them. 2 is they don't have to testify. And 3, they are not considered plaintiffs. We instead made up basically a fake nonprofit called Students Against Anti-Semitism, and they would be shielded from individual scrutiny. So if you look at the lawsuit, it's Shabbos Kestenbaum and the Students Against Anti-Semitism Incorporated versus Harvard. So they're not plaintiffs, they're a corporation. One of the also unintended positive consequences of that is I didn't know this at the time, but because they're a corporation and they're not suing as people, they are not entitled to monetary damages. Only I am. So I thought we had to split it 6 ways, but we don't. So we'll be sushi. We'll be sushi. Yes.
PDF part of the lawsuit at all?
Yeah, I mean, boycott, divestment, sanction was unanimously approved by the Harvard Crimson, which is the nation's longest student newspaper, like 5 years ago. In fact, there are 13 schools at Harvard, the law school, the business school, the college. After October 7th, 4 schools voted in support of boycott, divestment, sanction in response to October 7th.
And what are
Yeah.
you doing now?
Now I do speaking engagements full time. So if you want to support my my monthly rent payments, invite me back. Please. Yes. Federal District Court of Massachusetts. Anything else? Wow, a lot of questions.
You live in Massachusetts?
Not anymore. I just moved out. I'm back in New York.
Where you from? Tell us where you're from.
I'm from Riverdale, New York. Orthodox family, one of 7. I'm not the 7th, so that's not why they named me Shabbos. Again, I know all of your questions. First generation American. My dad actually was a Lubavitcher Chassid. He was Chabad. He printed the first Tanya in India and Pakistan. He studied in Brunois. My brother is Menachem Mendel. My sister is Chaim Mushka. I helped print the first Tanya in Auschwitz-Birkenau 3 or 4 summers ago. So yeah, I don't look like it, but I'm Lubavitcher. I actually, it's not political because we invited Kamala Harris to do the exact same thing, but I accompanied President Trump to the Ohel of the Lubavitcher Rebbe last month, so that was very significant. Yeah. We got a bracha from Rabbi Krinsky right beforehand. Right. Anything else? Okay, well, look, thank you very much. Say by the bell. Fine, the last question. Before I get to you, let me just say that I very much appreciate you doing what Harvard and MIT and Columbia never did, which is amplify the voices of Jewish students just listening to us. So I do appreciate it. Yeah.
Mandatory at Harvard to speak Hebrew in the beginning of the.
Oh, I think it was, but we're talking 1600s.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, very, very long time ago. The first Jewish professor actually was hired on the condition he convert to Christianity, which he did.
Really?
Yeah. So I think originally you're right. I think actually John Harvard himself wanted Hebrew to be the official language of instruction, which I don't think ever got off the ground, but I do think Hebrew language was mandatory. I also think Bible study was mandatory. In fact, I studied religion. I'm at the divinity school. The divinity school was the second school at Harvard. It was pretty early on. 1811 it was founded because John Harvard, he bequeathed all of his books and all of his money to the divinity school because he said the most important thing Harvard can do is to teach religious guidance and moral ethics to Presbyterian men. So they should go out and preach the good word of the Bible. Of course, Harvard has lost its way on that. It's the most immoral, irreligious school is the school of religion at Harvard. Okay, not exactly a positive note to end it off on, but listen, it was great having. I was about to say it's great having me. That is so arrogant. It was. How do I phrase it? It was great being here. It was great. It was yes. I had a great time. Okay. Thank you very much. Get home safe. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Wow, that was really nice. Very, very special. I just want to say that he was supposed to come last Motzei Shabbat, last Saturday night. And I had a miscommunication.
Oh, you
with
scared me.
Rabbi Rick. I gave him a real good scare, but I got a good scare back. Anyhow, the rabbi in California who organized it, the Chabad rabbi in Pasadena, so we had spoken about November 2nd. And whenever people tell me dates on the phone, I immediately put it in my calendar because I know I forget afterwards. And then he texted me that it's not going to work and it's going to be November 9th. And you never looked at that text. You always got to look at your text. But anyhow, so
And I was in Montreal at the time, so getting from like New York to LA was hard. Getting from Montreal to LA was not gonna
so
happen.
I text Shabbos. I say, I just want to touch bases with you about November 2nd. And I get a call from Rabbi Rifkin, and he says, "What's going on over here?"
I'm really scared.
Anyhow, but I'm really grateful that everybody came. This is very, very special. Thank you
you.
so much. There's a lot of hope now.
Yes,
You bring hope. Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now you gotta write a book.
Hello, Rabbi.
Tomorrow.
I'll see you on Tuesday.
Yes, you got your book already, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
I'll see you on Tuesday, and I'll be,
Yeah.
nice to go out and we.